Thank you again. So the BERDO Review Board does not currently have an appointed chair. So I will lead us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone on the board want to make a nomination for acting chair today?
Nominate Stephen Ellis as acting chair.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. I will now lead us in a vote. How do you vote for the motion to nominate Board Member Ellis to serve as acting chair? In favor, oppose, or abstain? Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
Board Member Ellis?
In favor.
Board Member Faruqi?
In favor.
Board Member Lattimore?
In favor.
And Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
Great. I will now hand the meeting over to Acting Chair Ellis.
All right, thank you, Diana. Let me just pull up the script here. Okay, good afternoon. I'm calling this public hearing to order at 4:36 p.m. In accordance with the Building Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emission Reduction Disclosure Ordinance Boston City Code, Ordinance Section 7-2.2, the BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on August 26th to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online to ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board. The public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. To do so, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you may raise your hand by pressing *9. Send your question to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. For the record, I am Stephen Ellis, acting chair of the board. I will now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Rashida Boyd.
Stephen Ellis.
Hassan Faruqi.
Yael Lattimore.
Jack Nelson.
Staff will now introduce themselves.
Hannah Payne, Director of Carbon Neutrality.
Diana Vasquez, BERDO Review Board Manager.
Zippy Chen, BERDO Review Board Assistant.
Claudia Diaz Martinez, Policy and Equity Advisor.
Okay. Here's the agenda for today's hearing and meeting. We'll start with discussing and voting on the funds finalists for the 2024 application cycle. Then we will switch into a public meeting where we will start with the approval of the meeting minutes. Next, we will hear updated guidance from the city. The city team will then provide administrative updates, and finally, we will adjourn. Before we start this agenda item, would any board members like to recuse themselves? I see Board Member Lattimore.
Yes, I would like to recuse myself because the agency that I am the executive director for, Coppin Square Neighborhood Development Corp., has a funding proposal, has also submitted a funding proposal, so I will recuse myself.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you and goodbye.
The review board will now discuss and vote on the finalists for the 2024 application cycle of the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. The applications chosen today will be invited to present at the September 9th hearing. Thank you, Diana.
Sorry, I can kick it off if you like, Chair.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. So I can do a quick review of what has happened so far. So we've opened and closed the 2024 application cycle for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. As a review, in total, we received 19 applications this year. The BERDO team on the city side did an initial review with the city's legal and grants team, just to make sure all of the projects submitted were eligible. And after that initial review, we then shared each application with an accompanying cover letter or a cover page and evaluation criteria sheet to each of the individual board members, which they then use to do their first initial review. And there's just a link to the project evaluation form because it's a public forum. If folks have been with us for a minute now, they may remember that we discussed this pretty deeply during the regulations development process. But in case you would like a reminder, this link will take you to the form. And the next slide will also be a nice big summary. So this is what it looks like. So these are the different criteria that the board members use to read through the applications and benchmark against. So emissions reductions, benefits to affordable housing, benefits to tenants, benefits to labor and workforce development, outdoor air quality, indoor air quality and quality of life, climate resilience benefits, energy benefits, and other benefits, which is a nice bucket for other benefits that the projects may bring. So that's just sort of a review of what's been done. In terms of what we're hoping to do today, so we on the city side have summarized the results of those individually completed evaluation sheets. We're going to summarize them for the board today and have the board members each have a chance to share their thoughts or questions on any of the top rated applications. The board will then open a public comment period for anyone in the public who would like to submit a comment. And then the review board will anonymously rank the applications and we'll share those results here live. And the review board will then vote to either invite a group of 5 finalists to the September 9 hearing to sort of present on their project proposals. Or if the review board would like more time, you could also request more time. So that's sort of the layout for today. So let's just jump into it. So in terms of a summary of the evaluation sheets, these 4 applications are applications that were included as a top 3 or scored as a top 3 more than once, meaning more than one review board member had these applications in their top 3 ranking in their individual evaluation sheets. So they include Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center, Fenway Community Development Corporation, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and the Community Builders. And we'll have a sheet or a slide summarizing each of these applications. Next slide, please. So the first one is Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center. So this is an affordable housing nonprofit seeking $250,000 to pay the upfront costs for installing solar on 9 multifamily buildings within 2 apartment buildings. So the Wilder Apartments and the Glendale Apartments. They say that 50% of the savings will be given directly to residents who pay their own electricity at Glendale because Dorchester Bay does pay for electricity costs at Wilder Apartments, and that money from the fund will reduce the payback period to 2 to 3 years. Chair, if you think it makes sense, we can pause on each of these and see if there are any questions or comments from board members.
Sure. Do any board members have any questions about the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center's application? Or comments? Okay, I'll go first. Just to call it out, it's been a minute, but I did find this application to be, relatively straightforward and the level of impact that it has over 9 multifamily buildings and the direct correlation to how residents would be able to save money on their bills. I found that this application was pretty straightforward for me in terms of selecting them as a choice that would be amongst at least my top. And so I really didn't have any particular comments about things that I thought were missing or any particular questions about things that I wanted to know more about. I found them to be relatively straightforward and the payback period made sense to me. So those are my only comments on that matter. I will pause again to see if there's any other board members who had any questions or comments about this one. If not, Board Member Faruqi.
Sure, thank you. My only questions that came up reading this application were about any kinds of barriers that may exist before the installation of rooftop solar. So like the reinforcement of the roof, having sufficient electrical wiring. I assume that the applicant has already considered and mitigated these barriers, but I'd want to make sure that those costs don't arise later on in the process. But overall, I found this application to be pretty straightforward and you know, as I will say for all the applications, I'm always curious to what extent they're considering other incentive programs, and in particular, the Solar for All funding that will soon become available.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. I also share that similar sentiments, and as we discuss the applications in whole, all of them, I will have some questions for the city about alternative funding sources, which were discussed at one of our previous meetings. So that's not lost on me, and I will be asking some of those questions myself today. So are there any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, hearing none. Diana, back over to you.
Great. I will then move us on to Fenway Community Development Corporation. So this is an affordable housing nonprofit in the Fenway Kenmore area, seeking $245,230.87 to conduct some energy efficiency and weatherization upgrades. So some things they list in their application include the installation of a heat pump, domestic hot water, installation of Energy Star roof exhaust fans and air regulator dampers, low flow shower heads, installation of R&D temperature averaging controls, and common area lighting occupancy sensors. Oh, and upgrade to the electrical service capacity at the site. So they have very specific things that they listed, and their request for $245,230.87.
Thank you, Diana. Are there any questions from the board or comments regarding the Fenway Community Development Corporation application?
Quick question.
Board Member Boyd.
So I've seen that they have other funding in the amount of like 1,748,000. Is that right? I believe.
I can look super quickly.
Oh
Sorry.
no, yeah, they do. I just thought that should be known, that they do have other funding, a large amount. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. Any other questions or comments from the board? So for me, you know, this was a application that it almost served as a bit of a reminder that Fenway CDC recently received the building portfolio approval from our board. You know, one of the things that I was finding interesting reading through their material, you know, the estimated emission reductions and then a potential updated estimated emissions reduction that they were potentially expecting from this project. I do recognize what Board Member Boyd was saying in terms of the funding. And so this goes back to my comment earlier about the consideration for other fundings and how that may add or retract from other projects being able to have access to the to our overall fund. You know, this, as many other projects, I was wondering about scale and its scalability for it to be able to have an impact in the city. But I found this application to be something that I was comfortable with. But nevertheless, I look forward to seeing how we continue this conversation. And it's worth noting that the slide Diana shared earlier, although we're a small but mighty board, the applications that are listed beyond the first one have two people or two board members that were sort of recommending that. So I expect somewhat of a robust conversation as we go through this today. So are there any other questions or comments from the board? Board Member Faruqi.
Thanks. I think similarly, I know some of these types of energy efficiency measures that they're proposing can also be funded by programs like Mass Save. And so I would be curious for all the applicants, but especially this one, to what extent they've considered that. And I'd also be curious whether this can be answered now or later, to what extent we can pare down an application and fund only specific pieces of it and not fund other pieces.
Diana?
Yes, I can answer at least the second question. So the review board does have discretion to either fund less than what's requested or more if you'd like. And you could, for example, say like because we have to make a grant agreement, which is sort of a contract with these organizations, you could have stipulations that say like we would like the fund to go towards this specific work. So there is room and flexibility for the board to have that kind of conversation.
Thank you, Diana. Board Member Nelson.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll just comment that my rating for this particular project was lower than some of the others due to the amount of emissions reduction. Some of the other projects had a higher annual reduction in CO2 emissions. So that's why it ranked lower as far as I was concerned.
Yep. Thank you, Board Member Nelson. That you're getting at what I was sort of calling out in the application, where there was one projection and then it's sort of acknowledgement that there would be a slightly lower projection after some of the work that they're currently doing. So that was something that I was taking into consideration as well. All right. If there are no more further questions from the boards or comments, Diana, I'll turn it back over to you.
So yeah, next we have Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So this is a climate nonprofit seeking 250,000 to supplement their Equisol program. Equisol brings rooftop solar to low and moderate income residents in Boston. And more specifically, they're applying to the fund seeking money to support their Blue Line Solar Access Program. So they have identified 8 properties in East Boston owned by East Boston CDC, 1 in Dorchester owned by Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust, and 1 in Mattapan owned by a low to moderate income building owner. So this is to help sort of supplement that or support that program. And they requested $250,000.
Are there any questions or comments from the board about the Green Energy Consumer Alliance application? Board Member Faruqi.
Very interesting application. I appreciated that they were thinking actively about how they can scale the economics of this program. And so I'm very interested in hearing more from them.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. I share the same sentiments. I felt like as I read through this application, there were more questions coming up for me. There is an opportunity, as Board Member Faruqi just stated, for something like this to be scaled up. But the way I was reading it, it did come across like there were a lot of contingencies or things that needed to happen or things that would be happening in tandem with one another. And so it was coming off for me like they're looking for someone to take a chance on them, essentially. And I don't mean that in any negative way. I think it is a very interesting application in the way that it was written for me to be like, okay, you're looking at many different sources and many different ways to utilize or deal with decarbonization within the city. So I found this one interesting, and I felt like I feel like I need to ask more questions or even reread this application one more time just to make sure I fully understand what's coming up with them. Are there any other further questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, Diana, back over to you.
Great. And now we have the community builders. So this is similarly a nonprofit CDC seeking 250,000 to support the installation of a solar array on top of 2 buildings, so 132 through 140 Seaver Street and 280 through 296 Seaver Street in New Franklin Park. So the apartments are affordable housing in the neighborhoods of Dorchester. The proposed solar array is predicted to achieve a projected 30% energy use reduction from baseline. And it is projected to produce 163,770 kilowatt hours of energy in year 1. So the community builders will act as sponsor and developer of the proposed project. And similarly, this is for 250,000.
Thank you, Diana. Are there any questions or comments from the board about the community builders application? Board Member Nelson.
I just find this one to be straightforward, and it seems to achieve all of the objectives of the fund and of BERDO.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. I agree. I also thought this one was straightforward. This goes back to my comments about scale, and it's not to say that, all the applications have the greatest amount of skills or the least amount of skills. This application is limited right now to 2 buildings, and so I try to think about diverse options of scalability when it comes to the usage of the funds. But as Board Member Nelson just mentioned, it was straightforward as well. So I'll just check one more time. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you. Back to you, Diana.
Great. So those were the applications that received more than one, or that were placed at least more than once on a top 3. And then these are the remaining applications that have been scored at least once as a top 3. So Roxbury Tenants of Harvard, Moorville House Apartments, Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation, Built Buildings Lab, Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, or NOAA, and Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. So we've prepared summary slides for each of these. Chair, I was going to lean on you a little bit here. If you think it would be worth going through each summary slide, or if you would just like to call on board members one by one, whichever you think is more effective.
I think I'm comfortable with allowing board members to comment as necessary, because I think, even as I stated, there are some areas where there are questions coming up about opportunities to select a different funding source, or offer a different funding source, or recommend a different funding source, or a different amount for that matter. So I'm actually going to, unless the board would rather us go through everything, I do think that, this is a tough one, because for the public, it might be useful for them to be able to see what had came in, but for the board, I'm just going to elicit or look for immediate reactions first, and then maybe we can briefly go through some of them if that's all right. So I'm going to start with you, Board Member Boyd. Do you have any questions or comments about the 6 applications that are listed here?
No, not right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. All right, over to you, Board Member Faruqi.
Thank you. My questions actually end up being pretty similar across a lot of the applications. I think, broadly speaking, I'm curious to know all of the other funding sources that have been considered for some of these repairs, in particular Mass Save, and then some of the loans that the Mass Community Climate Bank is offering. I wouldn't want to give funding to things that could be guaranteed to receive funding through other funding streams like Mass Save. I'm also curious about the workforce and labor aspects of all of these applications. There wasn't a ton of detail about the workers and all of the applications that are going to receive jobs. And I fully understand that some of that information may not be known by the applicants at this time, but I would want to make sure that all of these jobs are paying prevailing wages, and that these workers are ideally that they are Boston residents, and that we can fulfill as many pieces of the Boston resident jobs policy as possible through this. So that is something that I look forward to discussing with the applicants in the next meeting. And then I think specifically to individual applicants with the Moorville House Apartments application, it seems like that's one of the applications that will require some unit level renovations, such as things like windows and in tenants units. So I'm curious to know what types of notifications and how they're supporting the tenants who may have to be temporarily displaced while those types of repairs are happening. So I'd be just curious, what the nature of that is, how long the displacement may occur. Maybe it'll just happen for a few hours, and what types of things we're doing to protect the tenants. I think that really wraps up all of the questions I have at this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. I want to pause to see if the city has anything that they would like to respond to, or if you're just taking notes on what the board member just stated.
Sorry, we're just taking notes.
Excellent, not a problem. All right, Board Member Nelson.
Yes, so the Roxbury tenants of Harvard, they're really looking for funds for a deep decarbonization study. While that is definitely something that's needed, it seemed as though if we could go back to the other screen, the Moorville House Apartments, they have a project that's shovel ready, more so, and it rated high as far as its emissions reduction as compared to some of the other projects that we have reviewed. Matter of fact, when I look at it, it rated the highest as far as its emissions reductions as compared to the others. So that's why Moorville, as far as I was concerned, rated higher than Roxbury tenants. Looking down the list, the NOAA. Now that's a group of triple deckers, and I'm wondering that none of those buildings have to comply with BERDO. So isn't this objective of this fund is to help buildings comply with BERDO?
I can respond, Chair. That seems appropriate.
Sure, if you don't mind, can you also pull up NOAA's application, the short version on the slide?
Yeah. So yes, NOAA's project proposal is mostly related to triple deckers in East Boston, so buildings that are not subject to BERDO. And the regulations for the fund stipulate, and the ordinance stipulate, that the fund has to go to projects that reduce building emissions. But it also in the regulations state that the buildings do not have to be subject to BERDO, so it can go to buildings that are smaller than the threshold that makes you subject to BERDO. So that technically they are eligible. Should the review board decide, for this first year, you really want to focus on buildings that are subject to BERDO, for the first application cycle, like the review board can totally do that. But in terms of the letter of the law, they are eligible.
Thank you, Diana. Board Member Nelson?
So, the fact that these triple deckers aren't required to comply with BERDO, I didn't rate it as high as some of the others. I'm just trying to comment on my thought process. Could you go back to the other screen, please, that lists all of the remaining building lab? That's an interesting concept, and I think that definitely that can definitely help some buildings and homes connect excess materials with buildings that really need that. But I think that's all my questions. Codman Square, I rated that fairly high as well, due to the merits of that project. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. So, my thoughts, first I want to acknowledge, 2 applications that unfortunately did not make it on this list here, and because we had a total of 12. And so, the Boston Building Resource Center, as well as I believe I might be missing one more, but I just want to acknowledge that, we as a board, we made the motion to approve to at least $750,000. And so NOAA, although, I think what they're trying to do is relatively important, and the fact that the buildings are not subjected to BERDO right now, and it could be in the future, and the fact that they're asking for the max amount that we are looking to release, it kind of make it hard for me to really consider them as a viable application compared to the others. I did also look at Roxbury Tenants Harvard Association as something to consider, given that this board, at least I felt, convinced me that we want to focus on some aspects of scoping, because a lot of these locations do need some form of scoping because they don't know what steps they're going to need to take. And so this was a project that was hard for me to ignore. It did fall on a higher end of what I was looking at. And I guess the other thing that I would want to ask, and maybe this is more so, I'm trying to check if this is the right time to ask the city, you know, as you were going through these applications, I found myself thinking about that slide that I believe it was Hannah shared back in May about the decarbonization funding landscape. And so in that, we talked about the Massachusetts Decarbonized Affordable Housing Program. And then we as a board voted to expend $500,000 to support the Decarbonization Advisory Program, which, as a reminder, included the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant, excuse me, the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as I believe there may have been one more. But across the board, I'm just wondering, as the city was reviewing these applications, did you ever feel like or make a notation that some of these projects might actually qualify for something along those decarbonization funding landscape? And so I don't know if my question should be directed specifically to Hannah, but I just remember Hannah giving a pretty good presentation on that. And so I'm just wondering, what were the thoughts as you were reviewing all of these?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. So I think your line of questioning that many of the board members are having is a good one, and I think perhaps something to bring back when at the next meeting when the applicants, you're able to like ask them questions and we can even prompt them to come with some of that information. In terms of the Building Decarbonization Advisor Program, that $500,000 of the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund you all put into support. That is going to be for like a much kind of like higher level initial zero over time planning for buildings. We're targeting much smaller amounts for those kind of planning and scoping projects to try to get more people to be able to like at least get started on their BERDO planning journey. So I think, and you know, I will admit I have not read all of these in detail. Others on my team have, but you know, I think the level of detail that I think these applications are requesting and the funding amounts are to go at a much deeper level of that engineering scoping than what we'll be able to offer through the Decarbonization Advisor Program.
Okay, so I guess the answer to my question is, you know, because I think I was looking at Roxbury as being what I consider a potential applicant of that decarbonization advisory program. But if you're saying it's much more high level and what Roxbury is asking for is much more in depth, then I think that kind of gives me a perspective about what I might say in terms of the top 5 today.
Yeah, so for context for that program, we are reviewing bids that we received from the vendors right now, but we're targeting like between like $10,000 to $15,000 scoping work, not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's, yeah, if that helps.
Yep, that puts things very much into perspective. So I appreciate that. And also earlier I was trying to acknowledge the 2 applications that did not rise up to the top here. And so I mentioned the Boston Building Resource Centers as well as East Boston CDC. So those were the 2 that unfortunately are not on this list here today. I just want to call them out because, you know, as we're thinking about who are the 5 that we want to have come today, we've essentially narrowed this down to 10. So it looks like half of these will be selected and the other half, unfortunately, not this time around. So Diana, let me pause. Are there any other questions or comments from the board before I turn it back over to Diana? Okay, Diana.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yes, and I should mention, if there are any other applications that the board would like to mention, the board is definitely welcome to do that. This is just more of a summary of the evaluation sheets we got back, and so wanted to present it in that way. But it sounds like I don't think there are any additional comments or questions.
I don't think so.
Great. So we actually now have a public comment period. So because this is a hearing, so we now, Chair, will let you open the comment period.
Sounds good. We will now open the meeting to public comment. As a reminder to the public, to the members of the public, excuse me, to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Send your question to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. Again, as a reminder, we are limiting questions to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. We also ask members of the public to introduce themselves and their neighborhood. We will now wait to give members of the public the opportunity to provide comments. Okay, hearing none. Diana or Ziggy, I'm just going to ask, because I promised I would do this. Were there any questions sent to the BERDO Review Board at boston.gov email?
No questions sent in the email, but I do see one question or a comment in the chat.
Apologies. All right, from Eve Torrey, I wondered if we could see the slide prepared for the second list. Sure. Diana, can we please go back to those slides, and can you do a run through so that the public can see everything that is listed there?
Sure thing. So yes, we'll start with Roxbury Tenants of Harvard. So this is an affordable housing nonprofit in the Mission Hill neighborhood, seeking $187,000 to complete a study with greener use. So as board members have already mentioned, this was more on the scoping side versus a shovel-ready project. So they would like to investigate, analyze, and generate a basis of design to decarbonize and electrify their heating, cooling, ventilation, and domestic hot water systems. They did also mention scoping EV charging infrastructure and some renewable energy generation, in addition to envelope upgrades. And so this is more on the like trying to scope out or design their project versus actual implementation, I guess this is what I will say. And then the Mission Park campus consists of 147 townhouse units and 628 apartment units for context. Next slide. So yes, so now we have Marvel House Apartments. So applied to support energy efficiency and weatherization upgrades, as well as solar. The building itself is owned by the Episcopal City Mission, but the Marvel House Apartments is an LLC. It's senior housing, and they're seeking 250 to address issues related to heat loss, air sealing, indoor air quality, and increase electric usage for the implementation of air source heat pumps. The building is located in Fenway, and its primary use is for senior housing for low to very low income elder residents. And they just included in their application that their building is also used for neighborhood events such as voting, etc. The Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation, they're an affordable housing nonprofit as well, seeking 250 partly to repair the roof, but also to increase the numbers that are habitable within Warren Hall. So the roof replacement, I should mention, is just the first phase of a deep energy retrofit that is in the planning stages. So it seems that before they can really in earnest do the deep energy retrofit, they are needed to tackle their roof essentially. And it's a newly acquired building, so it was a naturally occurring affordable housing until Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation purchased it and acquired it. And so this is sort of the background information as to why they are now working to repair the roof as part of their first phase of their deep energy retrofit. And then Built Buildings Lab. So this is a building emissions reduction farming nonprofit. So they're currently receiving their 501c3 status, seeking 285,000 to develop a district to building level decarbonization roadmap. Within Grove Hall. So they are partnering with Grove Hall Main Streets to implement Grove Hall's green zone. So this would help determine carbon abatement potential for 29 BERDO buildings within the district of Grove Hall, and then determine the district's overall carbon abatement potential and use scenario planning to identify trade-offs and benefits to district level solutions versus building by building. And they also include that this whole process would engage community in the discovery process and identifying gaps. So this is more versus a shovel-ready project. This is a little bit more in that scoping, planning phase, but more on in a district level versus just a building level approach. And they're seeking 285. The Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, or NOAA, is a nonprofit affordable housing nonprofit seeking 750 to fully electrify and decommission their fossil fuel infrastructure, weatherize project sites, and upgrade ventilation needs in 5 to 7 of their affordable housing buildings in East Boston. And as was mentioned, these projects are in buildings that are not subject to BERDO, so mostly triple deckers. And then lastly, Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation, an affordable housing nonprofit seeking $309,894.16 to install energy efficiency and weatherization measures in 2 of their affordable housing buildings. So lighting sensors for exterior lighting, low flow aerators, low flow toilets, in-unit air sealing, and installing drain water heat recovery. And I believe that was the last one. Yes.
Thank you, Diana. Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, I see a hand. I'll turn it over to you, Michelle. As a reminder, please announce your name and your neighborhood, and you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name's Michelle Brooks, she, her pronouns. I live in Alston. A question that I had, I can't remember which one of the proposals it was in the top 4 round for a solar project, and I think it had said a projection of around 30% reduction to energy bills. And I was just wondering if that proposal was also specifying whether those savings would be directly applied to the bills of the residents in those units, or if it's just they're just referring to expected decreased energy bills due to the solar that they would be building.
Diana?
Yes, I believe you're referring to the community builders application. My understanding is that the reduction would be in energy usage. I did not, so I guess that would probably result in reductions in utility costs, but I can't guarantee that. I can look through the application really quickly though.
I have some notes up, and I believe the energy savings are mainly for common areas, but the savings would be reinvested into the programming of the organization.
Claudia, I may be wrong here, but I heard solar projects, and so the other one that was under consideration for solar was on the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center. So I'm not sure if Michelle was referring to the community builders or the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center.
Yeah,
Well,
so sorry. I was gonna say what I commented on was community builders, and that's the slide that included the 30% that Michelle mentioned.
Thank you.
okay,
Michelle?
thank you, Claudia. I think that was probably the one, but generally the question I had would kind of apply to both of whether they're specifically talking about applying, discounts to tenants' bills from the production of their solar project, or whether they're just talking about cost savings from energy reduction.
Thank you, Michelle. Claudia or Diana, do you want to provide any comment regarding Dorchester Bay as well?
Yeah, I can start, but Claudia, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, so Dorchester Bay is the application where they want to apply solar to 2 buildings, and so when the names of their buildings, I believe, are the Wilder Apartment and Glendale Apartment developments. So Wilder Apartments, the organization Dorchester Bay already covers the cost of electricity for residents, and they say 15% of the savings will be given directly to residents who pay their own electricity at Glendale Apartments. I imagine that means they will receive like credit for any solar that's generated up to 15%. But I can double check just to make sure that's totally correct.
Okay, thank you, Diana and Claudia. Eve, over to you. Please announce your name and your location. Apologies.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Eve Torrey, at Better City. I had a question. It came up in the conversation around sort of, the weighting, like there are these criteria for how the applications are being reviewed, but it came up in one of the comments about whether the applicant is required to comply with BERDO or not. And that isn't in the weightings, it's not in the criteria. And I just had a question whether it should more weight be given to those that need to comply or not. So I don't know the answer to that, but I thought it was a very valid question. I know it's legal in terms of the ordinance itself, but it wasn't something, I don't think, that came up in terms of, when the regulations when we were thinking through all the criteria, I don't think it came up. So I just wanted to raise that. I thought it was very interesting.
Thank you, Eve. Any comments from the city?
I'll just add that so yes, technically within the ordinance and the regulations, both buildings that are subject to BERDO and not subject to BERDO could be part of a project proposal to submitted to the fund, but we also left room and flexibility in the regulations for the review board to decide, for example, if they wanted to focus on certain themes, I think is what we called them, for each application cycle. So for example, the theme could be this fear that funding will go to buildings that are subjected to BERDO. I guess my one note I say would be, ideally we would know ahead of issuing the like announcement to grant for the grant, just because I think that would be very helpful for folks who may be interested to know that ahead of time. But that's a fair question. That's a question for the future. In terms of this year, the board has flexibility to decide.
Yeah, I think all of that is right. And I would just also add that, like, if you as a board are like feeling like you want to prioritize funding projects that are that go to support BERDO buildings, I think that's also an appropriate consideration for you to have. The evaluation criteria are, meant to be helpful in making that, but ultimately you all have, can make decisions as well on what your priorities are.
Thank you, Diana and Hannah. Are there any other further questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, hearing none, are there any other further questions or comments from the board? I did have one question, just out of curiosity. It was something that, Board Member Nelson was mentioning in terms of his focus, or at least I'm not saying that he's the only one focused on that, but the emission reductions. And so I guess, there was an application that came in, and I guess I'm wondering, how did it pass, or how did it go through the screening process? Because, and I just want to acknowledge, looking at the East Boston CDC, for example, I just did not see any information regarding emission reductions. And I guess I'm wondering, how did it become a potential application that was eligible from the city's review?
Do you want me to answer that one, Diana?
Sure.
Okay. So I think when we were doing that review, it was really looking specifically at what was potentially a trigger for the anti-aid amendment more than anything else. So really having a conversation with our law department and then the grants team and kind of being specific about, does the project serve a public purpose? And then are there, I think the other criteria we included was if they were already awarded grants from the city that they have yet to expend. So we weren't looking at all of the details of each application, and there are kind of, if they were complete in the same way that we do for giving you, for example, like a portfolio application. But really doing that screen to say, could we even, would it even be appropriate to give them money in the first place?
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I think, as I went through this application evaluation sheet, that first comment section, it says that if this is not present under the emission reductions, then this project is ineligible. And I think that's what made me sort of go, well, what happened here? But I do appreciate hearing the process and how you got to that point, or how the city got to that point in general. The one suggestion that I have for the evaluation sheet, just as a slight update, because there was a moment that after I had reviewed 3 applications, I did not remember, because of the evaluation form, that the low income individuals would technically fit within that benefits to tenants row. And I started applying them to the other. And so I had to pull up the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund again, just to be like, wait a minute, I know we considered low income residents. And so if you can please put that language in that line, so that, for future board members that are using this evaluation sheet, that they're not just looking at that line to only consider tenants, it's tenants and low income residents, I would appreciate that. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I think so.
Claudia?
I just wanted to add that in terms of the application completeness, I think like having an element of emissions reduction is also based on the project. So I believe like East Boston CDC, where like HVAC upgrades, on-site solar, so the connection to emissions reduction was clear. I think what perhaps wasn't as clear in the application formatting, and we can make this more clear for the following application cycles, is to actually include a number, because I believe they included like we're reaching net zero emissions with these upgrades, which is technically complete and like fulfills the requirements, but they didn't estimate as per a specific number like other applicants. So this is something that we can improve for sure for the next cycle as well. And I would also, sorry.
No, you're good.
I would also add that if you see across applications, there were also different methodologies used to estimate emissions reduction. So I would also just encourage board members to consider that when they're comparing these different numbers, because some might be apples to oranges rather than the same exact methodology and baseline and so on.
That's extremely helpful, as you sort of think about comparing scoping projects to projects that are ready to go. All right. I have no more questions or comments at this time. Diana, I will turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Chair. And I guess I should add one thing with, for example, East Boston CDC's application. When we did that first review with the legal and grants team, they did emphasize, for example, I believe East Boston CDC had maybe elevator upgrades in their application, which may not be totally related to emissions reductions. They did emphasize that the review board has flexibility to, as we talked about earlier today, say, we want the fund to go to exactly these types of projects and not these projects or these components that you included in your proposal. So that was also part of the thinking around this. Technically, it was eligible, for example, for it's maybe HVAC upgrades, and maybe not so much for the elevator upgrades. Great.
Thank you, Diana.
We're going to try something a little bit different that I don't think we've done for the review board just yet. We're going to try some live ranking. So I am sending each board member one by one a link to a ranking system. You will have to click start Sorry, I'm sending them via the Zoom chat. Um, it is a ranking system where you have to click start and you will rank your top 5 applications. So to rank them, you just have to click on them once, whichever the name of the application that you'd like, and then it'll populate on my backend, on the back end of this account. So I can share my screen once board members have had a chance to submit, but this is sort of the a sort of like live action in real time ranking system. So before, I guess I want to ask, did every board member get the link? Does it work for everyone?
Yes, Diana, and I just want to confirm regarding board member Lattimore's participation. Is she participating in this process at all as well, or?
No, she is not ranking.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So I think I'll just give board members a couple minutes.
And we're picking 6 to advance to next meeting.
Ideally 5, but
5,
if
yeah.
you feel if you feel strongly, you can include 6.
Right, thanks.
I feel like I should have teed up some music, some like waiting music. Great. I see 3 have been completed, so I think we're just waiting for one more. And I can share my screen so folks can see what the results are looking like. So currently, Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center um, has the most in favor, then Green Energy Consumers Alliance, the Community Builders, Fenway CDC, and Moorville House Apartments. But I believe we're still missing one more submission. Oh, here we go. So with all four submissions, top five are Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, the Community Builders, Codman Square NDC, and Fenway CDC. So with that, Chair, I think we could either discuss these five if the board feels comfortable inviting these five at the next hearing, or if the board feels strongly, we could expand that beyond these five, but this seemed like a good jumping off point to me.
Thank you, Diana. So I just want to provide space and time if there are any. I think we've discussed quite a few things regarding these applications already, but I just want to check if there are any questions or comments from the board regarding the top five that we see listed here on Diana's screen. Okay, hearing none so far, I will say that, it does look like the top four that you shared earlier, Diana, have all, at least gotten into the top five. And so the remaining one that has came through here is the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. So if there are no questions or comments, I'll pause one more time. Okay. Is there a motion to approve inviting Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center or economic develop? Yes, I said it right the first time. I'm confused myself. You mind pulling that back up so I can have all those five? I apologize. Matter of fact, I have it on a different screen. It's okay. I got it. We'll try this again. Is there a motion to approve the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center, the Fenway Community Development Corporation, the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, the Community Builders, and the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Center to the September 9th hearing to present as the 2024 Equitable Emissions Investment Fund finalists?
Motion to approve the five entities that have submitted applications as listed by the chair.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. One moment. On the motion to approve to invite the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center, Fenway Community Development Corporation, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, the Community Builders, and Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation to the September 9th meeting to present as the Fund 2024 application cycle finalists, how do you vote? In favor, oppose, or abstain? Board Member Boyd.
In favor.
I am also in favor. Board Member Faruqi.
In favor.
And Board Member Nelson.
In favor.
The ayes have it. The motion passes. Dorchester Bay Economic Development Center, Fenway Community Development Corporation, Green Energy Consumer Alliance, the Community Builders, and Codman Square Neighborhood Development Center will be invited to present at the September 9th hearing as the Fund 2024 application cycle finalists. The ayes have it, and the motion passes. Okay.
Yay, that's great.
Yeah, I think we probably did need some music, and there we go. There's the emojis. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Chair,
Diane.
may I just ask a quick question to you? I think we noted down some of the questions that you all had, but seeing as we're going to be inviting these applicants, it would be helpful if we could give them, make sure that they're coming prepared to answer the questions that you have. Things I've noted down include all other, discussion of funding sources they've explored, including Mass Save and other state and federal funding, their workforce and labor commitments, and then tenant notifications. I don't know, Diana or Ziggy, if you got anything else, but just wanted to, if you're okay with it, pause and just see if there's anything else that review board members really would like us to ask them to come prepared to answer.
So one question that I heard Board Member Faruqi bring up earlier, and this is my question for at least two of the applications. I'm not going to necessarily call them out per se, but that connection back to the benefits to labor and workforce development is something that I thought was missing in several cases. And so I would like that to be better explained. More for the city than for the applicants themselves. I found that, and this is where I didn't want to judge too harshly, but a definition of energy justice, I'm not sure, please forgive me if it has been described in the ordinance somewhere, but the definition of energy justice may not be clear to a lot of the applicants. And so a lot of times when they were answering the questions, they were answering questions about climate justice as opposed to energy justice, and those two are indifferent. I mean, one does fall underneath the other. And you know, if they're able to come with that question that I think Board Member Nelson, I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun here, about emissions and the dollar saved per emissions are things that, you know, just to be reiterated at the time of the presentation. So over to you, Board Member Nelson. I see you have him muted.
That was by accident.
Okay. All right.
But I do agree with your comments on some of the information that would be helpful.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Board Member Faruqi.
Yes, a few things. Yeah, I know the definition of energy justice is in the regulations, but I agree that it would be worth reminding applicants about that, and so they can understand that, you know, both in this round and in the future. I also have a few questions about some of the logistics of the applicants who didn't advance. If this is the appropriate time to ask them. If not, I can hold. Yes.
Sure, please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm hoping if we know that we're not going to pick folks, if we can let them know quickly. And then also I'm curious if we can get in touch with them and point them towards all of the various resources that the city's already compiled to support building decarbonization. I'm seeing some nods. Okay, great. That would be very appreciated, I'm sure. And I think that covers all of my questions for the time being. Thanks.
Thank you. And for the city, one further question, you know, so on September 9th, we're picking, the aim is to pick 3, correct?
Yes, the aim is to pick 3 up to 750,000. That being said, you know, the board has a lot of discretion, and so if it turns out that the board feels very strongly, you know, you'd like to give more money, or maybe 4 projects, that the board has discretion to do that. But in terms, if I'm being totally transparent, in terms of capacity, we think 3 projects would be like an ideal number.
Okay. And I will remind myself and just to put it out there, what Board Member Faruqi had asked earlier about maybe funding a portion of certain things is certainly something that, you know, I found myself opening up to in advance of this meeting. So on September 9th. Nevertheless, I'll just check on Board Member Boyd. Do you have any questions or comments?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Not a problem.
And if I may jump in and just the schedule, and we're going to go over this later. The presentations will be September 9th, but then we saved time on the September 24th hearing to vote on the finalists. So if there is, you know, interest in the board after you've heard from the applicants to consider funding part of a project, I think we would want to use that time between those meetings to have a conversation with the applicants to make sure that their project could be feasible with just partial funding or something like that. So that hopefully we could get the questions answered September 9th, so that you could have all the information before that the September 24th hearing. But if it needs to continue, we can. That's just our proposed schedule.
Thank you for that clarification, Hannah. I do appreciate it. All right. I'm going to assume there are no further questions or comments. I am calling this public meeting, I'm reading it as is, I'm calling this public meeting to order at 5:44 p.m. First on the meeting agenda is to approve the previous meeting minutes from August 12th. Are there any questions or comments about the meeting minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the motion to approve the meeting minutes, board members may vote in favor, oppose, or abstain if they did not attend the last meeting. Those in favor of approving the meeting minutes say aye or show your hands. Aye.
Aye.
Those board members who wish to abstain say abstain.
Abstain.
All right, the ayes have it, and the motion passes. We are now going to hear from the city about updated guidance regarding building portfolios and individual compliance schedule application deadlines. I will now turn this over to Hannah.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, 1 second. I just wanted to note that Board Member Lattimore has rejoined for the public meeting.
My apologies.
Thank you. I will be on mute for the most of this call, but thank you.
Welcome back, Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you.
All right, Hannah.
Okay, so I wanted to give the board an update on some new guidance we issued to extend the application deadline for individual compliance schedules and building portfolios. So I know this was something that several of board members had raised earlier about the September 1st deadline coming up quickly for both of these applications. So we have moved the deadlines for both of those to January 6th. We are still encouraging all building owners to get your applications in as early as possible so that the board has time to review them and that the building owners can have kind of more assurances of what their compliance path will look like. But we did want to give people more runway on this for a few reasons. One being that there have been some challenges with getting data from the utilities over the summer. So for folks who were able to complete their reporting this past year on time, this hasn't really been an issue, but for folks who had requested extensions, we've been running into some issues as some systems have changed over at the utilities. We're working through them all, but it's created some challenges in folks getting their data and being able to do accurate planning. So we wanted to give people more time for that. And then also we had some delays in getting our own emissions calculator up and with the accurate data. So we updated this guidance. We sent it out to the BERDO newsletter, I believe the review board newsletter too. Thank you, Ziggy. It's up on the website, and we're letting folks know about this change. And happy to answer any questions from the board on this. We did not change the short-term hardship compliance deadline. That is still October 1st. However, building owners can apply for a short-term hardship compliance plan after that deadline if unforeseen circumstances materialize after that deadline. But really, if folks are looking for a short-term hardship compliance plan to give them more time to, make a plan, figure out what their compliance can look like, they should be getting that in for October 1st. So that is not changing. And then the deadline for long-term hardship compliance plans that could be eligible for 2026 compliance year will be April 1st of 2025. That's per the regulations.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I will now ask each board member if they have any questions or comments. So I will start with you, Board Member Boyd.
Nope, all set. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for revisiting the deadline of those applications. I think that September 1st was definitely, it's coming up soon, but sitting there with Labor Day and the weekend, that's a lot. So I do appreciate the adjustments that the city has made to allow a little bit more flexibility, especially since this is the first time a lot of building owners are submitting these applications. I have already gotten majority of my questions answered by Ziggy and Diana, so I will pass it on to Board Member Faruqi.
Great. Thank you, staff, for putting this together. I'm curious how the utilities have been in terms of rectifying that reporting issue. Do we have updates?
Yes, they've been very responsive, and we've been working with them to get temporary workarounds and longer term fixes in place. So we are hoping it is temporary. On Eversource's side, they changed over all of the account numbers. So they've had some big internal shifts that we're working through, but we have good working relationships with partners in both Grid and Eversource.
Good, good. But the issues are still persisting, seems like.
I think they are mostly resolved. People should be able to
Okay.
get their data now. I can come back with an update next time. Aiden knows all the details. I just know that things are like working, but I don't know the exact details of where the long-term fixes stand.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's good. Great. That's an update. Good update to hear. So thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. Board Member Lattimore.
No questions.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Board Member Nelson.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will now be covering administrative updates. Ziggy.
All right, so I wanted to give a quick update on the number of applications we've received. We currently have 11 building portfolio applications and 2 ICS applications. And we're still waiting to hear back from the long-term hardship compliance plan applicants about their resubmissions after the applications were deemed incomplete. But the city has had some one-on-ones with the applicants to discuss the requested updates, so hopefully they'll resubmit their missing information soon. We have received 1 nomination still so far to join the review board for our open seat. And hopefully as the deadline approaches, which I think is the end of this week, we'll receive more nominations. The BERDO emissions calculator has been updated to reflect 2023 energy data and more accurately reflect Massachusetts Renewable Portfolio Standard. And we have found that the RPS has made a significant impact for some owners. So we do recommend people check that out if they have not recently. And also want to bring your attention that Diana has sent out some invitations for RDH training. The training on September 5th, we will see on the timeline, will cover topics beyond the building, such as district energy systems, RECs, PPA. Also, there are holds on your calendar for another cohort training session. Like last time, please respond yes to any of the times that work for you and deny the ones that you have conflicts for. And looking at our future meetings, October 14th is Indigenous Peoples Day. We can reschedule that meeting to October 15th or the following Monday. If that works for you, we can always also do a different date. You don't have to decide now, but I just wanted to bring your attention. And then also to remind people that next meeting we'll be hearing from presentations, and then you could vote on September 9th, but there's also room on September 24th to vote if you need more time to discuss and think about the applications. You don't have to vote until September 24th. And again, our next meeting is scheduled for September 9th.
I'll just add for the cohort trainings for RDH, to be clear, you only have to attend one, so it's the same training, but in smaller groups. So if you accept, different ones that you can attend, you're not committing to attending to more than one. It's just more so we can figure out the scheduling.
Thank you, Diana. Diana and Ziggy, can you just, as a quick reminder, remind us how many board members how many seats are we still trying to fill at this point?
We have 2 empty seats currently.
So only 1 application for 2 empty seats. Okay. Do we need to do anything to sort of, talk more with the community-based organizations to have more people that they're recommending, or, I'm just curious, what needs to be done?
I can jump in on that. I think what we've seen in the past is applications tend to come in last minute on a deadline. So I think, and we have said we would keep it open if we don't have enough applicants. So I think we can follow up with board members after this week if we don't have the applicant pool that we need to support some of that outreach.
Okay, thank you very much. And just checking, are there any questions or comments for the board? I know Ziggy just went over quite a bit in terms of the timeline. Opening the floor for a second. All right. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
A second.
On the motion to adjourn this meeting, board members in favor say aye.
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 All right,
Aye.
the ayes have it. The motion passes. This meeting is adjourned at 5:55 p.m. Thank you all.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.